immediately. Good evening, everybody. What a privilege. Thank you, Daniel. Mr. President, I have already anticipated a new Prime Minister in the making, a young Prime Minister in the making. And thank you for the warm welcome. It's a great honor for me to be here in this historic hall addressing the world's renowned Oxford Union. And dear members of the Union, it is with mixed feelings of trepidation and hope that I speak to you today. My task is not an easy one. As if being a Palestinian envoy was not hard enough as it is, I have arrived fresh from Donald Trump's America to a UK in the throes of Brexit. And I thought Israel-Palestine was complicated. And it will not be difficult to convince you that the era of Donald Trump spells disaster, not only for us, the people of Palestine, but everywhere. I hope to argue, however, that it also creates opportunity for alternative peacemaking between Palestinians and Israelis. I hope to persuade you that even as we witness a retrenchment of what might be called the international order, Palestine offers the chance to reaffirm the importance of international cooperation. It offers an opportunity to reaffirm the importance of international legitimacy and multilateralism while rejecting the siren call for populism, special interests, unilateralism, and the law of the jungle that such regressive attitudes, however prevalent today, bring with them. I hope to suggest to you that the role of Britain could be crucial in this endeavor. Finally, I hope to impress upon you the centrality of justice and law in any workable concept of relations between countries in the modern world. Now, it may seem strange to you, dear audience, that I, the former Palestinian ambassador to the United States, the one who ended up being tasked with closing our diplomatic mission in Washington because of the chasm separating us from the US administration, should be arguing that the present incumbent of the White House might actually prove a net positive for Palestinian-Israeli peace. After all, everything Washington has done so far has brought us further from the goal of a just, or indeed any two-state solution. Denationalizing the Palestinian issue is the aim of every act by the Trump administration. The closure of our mission in the US was meant to deliver a real blow to the collective representation of the Palestinian people. The significance of the move is amplified by the shattering of the US Consulate General in East Jerusalem. Shocking, since the consulate was established in 1844 to represent the US in Palestine and has since been the official point of contact between the American and Palestinian governments and peoples. As well as denationalization, the Trump administration has also sought to de-internationalize the Palestinian issue. What was the reason to close our mission in Washington? Because we went to the International Criminal Court. Because of our reversion to international legal mechanisms. During Nikki Haley's term as US ambassador to the United Nations, her prime task, I may add, was the dismantlement of the international framework when it comes to Palestine. The Trump administration has in effect not only backed Israel's maximalist positions on Jerusalem, but on all other issues. In attempting to remove the issue of refugees from the negotiating table by declaring that these refugees should not, in fact, be considered refugees. This is not only a blow to the internationally guaranteed rights of Palestinian refugees, it also endorses those who will deny the most heinous crime that befell the Palestinian people, the Nakba. The 1948 catastrophe, where more than 2/3 of the nation's population were expelled from their homes and lands. Washington has cut funding to the UN body, UNRWA, that caters to the needs, the very real humanitarian needs of these refugees. It has cut funding for the Palestinian Authority, the institutions around which a Palestinian state was supposed to have been built. Meanwhile, the US ambassador to Israel thinks Israeli settlements in occupied territory, indisputably illegal under international law, are part of Israel. The ambassador has been publicly celebrating his material support of illegal settlement building for 20 years. The US National Security Advisor has described the illegal settlements as housing projects. As the US Special Representatives for International Negotiations, who is in overall charge of Palestinian-Israeli negotiations, served as a security guard in one of these illegal colonial settlements. This is the team. This is the Trump team that has promised, threatened actually might be a more appropriate word, to propose its own ultimate deal to solve our issue. Though it has repeatedly postponed actually bringing something concrete to the table. But all this talk about a so-called peace plan and an ultimate deal is really a tactical distraction. That's all what's in it. The Trump administration has actually been abandoning the two-state solution and allowing the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to proceed at an unprecedented pace towards the completion of the Greater Israel project through land grabs and settlement construction. Dear union members, good. Why am I saying this? It's been 26 years. Let me repeat, 26 years. Since Palestinians put aside decades of suffering, displacement, and oppression, set aside mistrust and skepticism, and took a painful but essential compromise for peace by recognizing on 78% of historic Palestine the State of Israel. By gambling to trust that there was a real partner for a peace of the brave in Israel. This was in spite of years of settlement building, in spite of the fact that no Israeli leader at the time had recognized Palestinian representation for the Palestinian people, let alone uttered the words Palestinian statehood. It was in spite of the brutality inflicted upon our people during the first Intifada. And perhaps just as important as having a real partner in Israel, the Palestinian leadership became convinced that there was real intent in Washington to see this process through to its logical conclusion. A two-state based on the internationally recognized borders along the 1948 armistice lines, better known as the 1967 lines, with East Jerusalem being capital of the State of Palestine and a just resolution to the plight of Palestinian refugees. At the time, this seemed obvious to everyone. Of course, there would be difficult moments and setbacks. There would be times when progress would seem impossible. But as long as the parties agreed on the end goal, the role of the American facilitator would simply be to remind the parties of that goal and guide them in the right direction. This turned out to be a charade. A charade premised on the false idea that the US could and would act as a neutral mediator. It hasn't and it didn't. Its unique diplomatic approach to Israel, carrot or larger carrot, financial and military assistance, or even more financial and military assistance, only encouraged Israeli expansionism, as seen most visibly in rampant settlement expansion. As they grew, and I mean by hereby grew the illegal settlement expansion, as they grew, the chances for peace shrunk, one brick at a time. And today, we have come full circle. Today, the Prime Minister of Israel feels sufficiently empowered by the lack, if not the absence, of international interest to publicly declare, as he did on the BBC not long ago, that all Palestinians could hope for is a state minus, autonomy plus. So much for the peace of the brave. So much for the two-state solution. So much for international resolutions. Now, to give credit where credit is due, at least the Trump administration is no longer hiding its sympathies. For the benefit of anyone who had yet to be convinced of American bias, the present US administration has not so much removed, but happily torn off the fig leaf that the peace process provided for Israeli expansionism. So what now? In the short term, not much progress can be expected. That is, unless states like the UK act. Yet, there is an opportunity here. How? Perhaps the most important consequence of US unilateralism is the spotlight it shines on the importance of multilateralism and global diplomacy to solve international conflicts. I will repeat this. Perhaps the most important consequence of the US unilateralism is the spotlight it shines on the importance of multilateralism and global diplomacy to solve international conflicts. The idea of a global order based on international law was exactly that. There were laws by which countries had to abide. In this sense, my friends, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict was a test case far more important than simply the fate of those directly involved. It asks questions of the international community. It asked questions directly of the US. The questions were simple. Are you committed to these laws? And if so, how far will you go to ensure their implementation? The answer has been negative. Rather, and for 26 years, Palestine was made the exception to the rule. Palestine was made the exception to the rule that a resolution of international conflicts should be achieved through international law. That's the rule. Instead, we were told that resolution should come through negotiations between the two parties. Between the two parties. However, this assumes some kind of parity. There is no parity in this equation. There is only a military occupation and everything that follows. And there is so much that follows. There is the occupying and the occupied, the colonizing and the colonized, the besieger and the besieged. To suggest Some sort of equality between the two sides was and is a travesty. Not only that, given the vast asymmetry of power between the two sides, which was only exacerbated by the US favoring of Israel throughout the peacemaking process, such logic and the process built on it was doomed to fail. If the world's superpower will not respect international law and the rules embedded within them, why should anyone else? If the world's superpower won't even convince its friends to respect legality, then what hope is there for everyone else? Some might say, this is not the time to talk about internationalism and international order. Not after the US National Security Advisor John Bolton, not long ago, issued a public threat to ICC judges to be arrested at US borders if they prosecute Israeli violations. However, I would argue that it is exactly because of the attack on our international order that we need to stress it, defend it, and abide by it. Bolton and his ilk are no match to the vast majority of us, the citizens of the world, who believe in universalism. And no region, perhaps understands the importance of a legally based global order better than Europe. After all, it was because of populism and the pursuit of narrow national interests that two devastating world wars played themselves out in Europe and elsewhere, killing millions and millions. Everything from the horrors of the Holocaust at the hands of the murderous Nazi regime to the horrors of the nuclear attack on Hiroshima came from that. This is why the United Nations was born. This is why the United Nations was born. And this is why the Geneva Conventions were drafted. It is why we have laws for war and occupation. It is why we prohibit the acquisition of territory by force and assert the rights of those displaced by conflicts to protection, return, and reparation. On Palestine, the Trump administration and the government of Benjamin Netanyahu have asked their own question of the world. How committed are you to international legitimacy and international law? This is the challenge facing Europe and the UK at present. Dear Union members, I believe it is of the utmost importance that both the UK and Europe stand up to this challenge and seize control of peacemaking. The UK has bravely started doing its part. The UK has defended the international framework for resolving the Palestinian issue in time of need last year and this year. The UK has opposed the US move on Jerusalem. It has doubled its contributions to UNRWA. It has kept its vocal opposition against illegal settlement building, including Israel's intent to destroy the village of Khan el-Ahmar. These are important because not implementing the international framework is one thing. Allowing it to wither is quite another. I think there are other things the UK can do, and by doing so, show leadership on the international scene and take a firm pro-internationalist stand. The UK and the world now have an opportunity presented by the Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas, on behalf of his people in the Security Council in February last year, in which the President offered a Palestinian Peace Plan, PPP, calling for the convening of an international peace conference. A conference that would aim at ending two things. Firstly, Israel's occupation of Palestinian land, and secondly, America's exclusion of the rest of the world. The UK role is not only political, but also about implementing British law. For instance, there is a deceit that needs to stop whereby goods made in illegal Israeli settlements in occupied territory are labeled as made in Israel and then sold here in Britain. This must be ended. On my way to Oxford this morning, I saw a clip tweeted by the UK Secretary of State for International Trade, the Right Honourable Liam Fox, declaring from Davos, next to his Israeli counterpart, that they have in principle a UK-Israel trade agreement in preparation for Brexit. I have requested and I'm waiting a copy of this agreement. Let's see if it clearly differentiates between Israel and Israel's illegal expansion. The clearest way to show that the international community does not support illegal settlements in occupied territory is by not accepting to buy from and trade with those settlements. Second, why is it that a Palestinian from the West Bank cannot visit Britain without a visa, but an illegal Israeli settler in the West Bank can? While this right is given to illegal settlers, Palestinians are denied the most basic right of freedom of movement by Israel. How ironic is this? How ironic is this? Furthermore, why is it that numerous British citizens are denied entry to Israeli airports the moment they declare they are visiting Palestine? Let me tell you, my friends, that if such behavior was carried out by any country other than Israel, the UK government would be infuriated. How does it serve the security of Israel that many of the thousands of cancer patients suffering silently in Gaza are refused entry or passage through Israel to access medical treatment? How does it serve the security of Israel? Not just in Gaza. Just 2 days ago, Al Maqasid Hospital in Jerusalem was raided by Israeli forces during its 50th anniversary celebration. Our education system is not spared these deliberate attacks. Young Palestinians receive scholarships to study in the most prestigious universities around the world. Rawan Yaghi from Gaza was among the lucky ones who was able to defeat all obstacles and attended Oxford a few years ago. What a delightful young lady. However, many of her fellow Palestinians are less lucky. At the same time, international professors teaching at respected Palestinian universities are often targeted and denied visas. Professors, British, American, from all over the world. At Birzeit University, for example, we have 14 professors, including British citizens, who have been denied visas for or extension of their permits because they teach at a Palestinian university. These are daily violations that the UK must vigorously protest as the oppressive means that they are. And to spare you the agony, I don't dare mention the horrific numbers and cases of Palestinian youth and children who are being murdered by Israeli forces. Only yesterday, I was looking at the photo of Abdel Hafiz Salha, a handsome, very handsome, promising young boy of 14 years old, who succumbed to his wounds a few days ago. As a father myself, I cannot begin to imagine the pain. I really can't. And beyond all this, there is political steps the UK could take. that could be hugely positive. And none more so than, as the UK Parliament has already voted to do, recognize the state of Palestine. Recognize the state of Palestine. The argument has long been that recognition of Palestinian statehood should come as an outcome of negotiations and when the issue of borders is settled. That has been an argument for too long. But that argument is not actually being adhered to. Israel has no settled borders, as you all know, has no defined borders, as you all know. Yet the UK government recognized the state of Israel long ago. The Balfour Declaration wasn't the outcome of negotiations, certainly not with us, the Palestinians, the indigenous and overwhelming majority population of Palestine back then. Why not recognize Palestine? If the UK and the international community more broadly are serious about a two-state solution, recognize this outcome from the outset, would send a signal to Israel that the world is committed to the peace process and to the parameters of negotiations. This is also important because, as we have seen, leaving the outcome of negotiations to the parties is simply code for leaving the outcome to the stronger party. Recognizing one state of the two adds to the asymmetry. To level the field, either the UK de-recognizes the state of Israel, leaving recognition of the two states as an outcome of the peace process, or recognize the state of Palestine. We call for the second. We call for the second, the recognition of the state of Palestine. And this brings us back to the idea of an international order, one where laws apply equally to the strong and the weak. That's the very premise of international order. That surely has to be something worth striving for. Moreover, recognition is a way to stop, or at least slow, Israeli colonial expansionism. If Israel is convinced that the international community is resolute when it talks about two states, why invest in illegal colonial settlements? If these settlements are at the same time prevented from becoming economically viable, if the products that are produced on this stolen land are shunned everywhere, then why continue with them? Those are incentives, negative incentives perhaps, but incentives nonetheless, to divest from settlements and end the apartheid system of which they form a crucial part. Dear Union members, the UK stands at its own historic juncture. It also stands at a moment of opportunity. It can take a lead in ensuring that the international community continues down the path of ensuring a global order based on justice and the rule of law. It can assume its historic responsibility for Palestine and advocate for the rights that have been denied Palestinians far too long: freedom, independence, and justice. It can also assume its historic responsibility for Israel by helping it heal. And it is not just Palestinians who are in need of help, but equally, if not more urgently, Israelis are in need of help. Not only to curb Israel's territorial appetite, but also to confront Israel's far-right extreme government with its growing support and alliance with illiberal and repressive forces. It is time to be in the right side of history. Only if, 50 years ago, when Israel took violent possession of East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, Israelis were confronted with a future in which their friends in the international arena are the far right-wing, populist strongmen from around the world in countries like Guatemala, Honduras, Poland, Hungary, Brazil, or Trumpism. they would surely have been shocked and in disbelief. Yet, that is the reality today. Israel may be the stronger party, but it treads a dangerous and unsustainable path. And refusing to leave are we, the Palestinians, as militarily weak as we may be, but native to the land and deeply rooted in it. And allied with us are international law, the youth of the world, grassroots organizations, human rights organizations, artists, liberals, and progressive Jews. The list is long. In the meantime, we, the people of Palestine, will continue nurturing hope and raising our children to the high standard of their ancient and great nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the speech. Then, following on, my first question is, where do you think this crisis of leadership on the Palestinian liberation question in the US and in the Trump administration, where has that come from?
The current crisis with the US?
Why has it arisen and where has it come from?
We have had always a problem with the performance of the US in terms of its role as a mediator between Israel and Palestine in the peace process. But performance is something and policy is something else. The US has kept its policy for the last 50 years. Since the Reagan administration, the US has endorsed the two-state solution on the 1967 borders. It has written to us a letter of guarantees by Secretary of State James Baker stating the US policy positions and guarantees, including the status of East Jerusalem. There is a special paragraph dedicated in that letter of guarantee by Secretary Baker that the US will not recognize Israel's control, expansion of Jerusalem, and that this is a final status issue. So we kept on the table with the US despite its bad performance and its ineffective approach because it kept its policy. The Trump administration has simply dismantled that policy, dismantled that vision. So here comes the issue. We were hoping against hope that perhaps the US performance as Israel's lawyer, and this is not me saying, this is a senior State Department official, Aaron David Miller, who once described the US role throughout the years of the peacemaking as being Israel's lawyer. Comes Trump and he decided to be Israel's policeman, simply ticking the box of whatever Benjamin Netanyahu gives him and totally and utterly reverse decades-long US policy on Israel-Palestine.
So now that you've switched your efforts to the United Kingdom, you've been a long-standing friend and ally of Jeremy Corbyn's, and how important has Jeremy Corbyn specifically been in pivoting the focus of the PLO away from the US to the UK?
No, this isn't about one leader or one party for that matter. This is about the UK. And I assure you there is a cross-party support for peace in the Middle East in the UK. There is a cross-party support for a Palestinian state, the end of occupation in the UK, among Labour and among Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats and all the political mosaic of the UK. Yes, indeed, we have been following the increased support among the Labour Party, and this support is not, we believe, to be pro-Palestine. The increased support for pro-two-state solution, a genuine peace. We will be working to make sure that that cross-party support is going to bring the UK in a place that would enable us all to move in the right direction.
But then in the wake of the anti-Semitism crisis that faced the Labour Party, and especially Jeremy Corbyn himself, in your opinion, how does the Labour Party now and Jeremy Corbyn stand in relation to them being an asset or a liability to this peace process?
You see, the issue of anti-Semitism is real, it does exist. And I believe a person like, and a leader like Jeremy Corbyn, who has been in the forefront of fighting against any form of racism, any form of hatred for small minorities anywhere in the world, all through his life, would not have a shred of hatred in his heart. And I think he and many in the UK would be in the forefront of the fight against anti-Semitism. But also we want to make sure that this is not a distraction and a diversion from the real issues. And this is not becoming a political tool to actually just harm your opponents, as opposed to focusing on the real issues, be it anti-Semitism or, in fact, the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land. Jeremy Corbyn, the current UK government, you just heard me commending their historic position. The UK is a net asset, and we need to make sure that that net asset utilizes its absolute full potential.
But then do you feel as though the crisis has damaged the ability for the UK to utilise its full potential?
No, the UK position has been clear from the beginning. The UK has kept very good relationship with Palestinians, with the Israelis, with the Arab world, with America, with Europe, of course, and that's why the UK is uniquely positioned in that place. I think if you are referring to the specific allegations, I don't believe this should affect in any way the ability of the UK government, be it Conservative, be it Labour, be it Liberal Democrats, to actually advance in the direction the vast majority of UK citizens would want their government to proceed to.
Then how do you think, on a slightly different topic, the UK's departure from the European Union will affect our ability to aid the Palestinian-Israeli peace process?
Say it again.
How will our leaving of the European Union and our integrated collaboration with the EU27 affect our ability to develop the Israeli-Palestinian peace process?
Well, the UK would be very beneficial for us in the EU, and it will be very beneficial for us outside the EU. The UK stands on its own, given its historic connection and responsibilities, given its current relationship with all parties. In the EU, the UK was a force of good and a balancing factor, and a state that was making sure that the EU overall position would be in line with international legitimacy. The EU on its own, in my opinion, would continue being a force in the EU and perhaps with the US and elsewhere. We are not worried in either case. The UK is important, part of the EU. The UK is important as as a Brexited, if I may use that term, as a country on its own.
And then finally, I think before we open up questions to the audience, with the upcoming Israeli elections...
You're asking difficult questions, Daniel.
I try. How important is it, do you think, the upcoming Israeli elections will be for the continued peace process?
Well, we are hoping, but monitoring the elections, and it doesn't really look like Benjamin Netanyahu is having real opposition and contenders that are seriously threatening his longest tenure in the history of the State of Israel so far. It's regrettable that we don't find the so-called peace camp, the center-left and the left of Israel, bringing itself together and actually presenting an alternative to Netanyahu and challenging Netanyahu's nihilistic approach and challenge Netanyahu's argument that they could manage this conflict forever. We don't see these voices coming, and if they are there, they are not as vocal as those who are in the far right side of the Israeli political map. So I hope I'm mistaken, but all indicators suggest that he may win again, actually.
Now let's move over to some questions from the audience. If you could just wait for the microphone to be brought to you. So we'll go to you, sir, in the back row.
Well, my question is very simple, is this, that how do you think about the changing nature of the governments in Brazil or like India, which has been like BRICS nation mainly, because India has been traditionally supporter of the Palestine cause since the days of Nehru, and now with the Bharatiya Janata Party or Modi government taking over and increased military relationship between India and Israel. So do you think that the emerging economies and their stand towards Palestine are changing over the years? Countries like India or Brazil, in that sense?
Well, we have to make the absolute distinction between personalities, and between countries and nations. So India as a nation, as a country, as a people, as a society, grassroots, in my opinion, would always be in the right side of history. And we remember from the time of Mahatma Gandhi and his own verdict about the situation before it's even started, all the way to now, the mainstream Indian thinking is pro-justice, pro-peace, pro-ending this conflict, and pro the two sides. Now, if you're referring to the particularity of the Modi government, that's a very long discussion. But what we are saying to the Modi government is that your very close relationship to the Netanyahu government should not mean that you abandon your historic, long-held position and policy that represents the true depth of support in India.
And then, yeah, to the gentleman on the front row.
Thank you, Ambassador. I agreed with a lot of what you said in regard to the peace process, but I would just like to suggest this to you perhaps, that one of the main reasons, if not the key reason, why there isn't peace now is continuous and current Palestinian unwillingness to accept a Jewish state in the Middle East. And I was referenced during the war, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem being a famous friend of Hitler and anti-Semite, continuing even back in the 1930s, rejection of the Peel Commission, rejection of every single peace process, coming up to 2000, Camp David. Fellow Arab leaders and Palestinian officials told Abbas this was a terrible mistake to reject your greatest opportunity for peace. 96% of the West Bank, a massive amount of refugees coming. The Palestinian embassy there were shocked by how much they were offered and rejected that. And this continues to the current leader, Abbas, who you talk so proudly of, who has blamed the Jews for the Holocaust and has said anti-Semitic statements. There are anti-Semitic pictures in Palestinian school books. It is an unwillingness to accept any form of Jewish state that has continued throughout history that is a key reason why we don't have peace. Not settlements, which I do condemn, but it's the Palestinian unwillingness to accept a Jewish state that is the main cause of lack of peace.
Thank you very much, my friend, for your passionate question, and I understand very well your points, and I very much, I'm delighted that you agree with most of the points, so we have much in common then. As for the issues you have raised, and if we have much in common, this gives me much more hope about all these, past things. But you have touched on many issues, including the recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. This is such a misconception, because in international relations, in no way you can recognize the type of the state. You just recognize the state. It's not up to you as a foreign country to define the type, the kind, the religion of the state. Otherwise, maybe Italy would come to Britain and say, recognize us as the Catholic state of Italy, or the Orthodox state of Greece. Doesn't work this way. Greece is a state, Italy is a state, and Israel is a state. The question is, did we Palestinians recognize Israel as a state? And we did that not only verbally, but in writing by the founder of the Palestinian Liberation Movement, that is Yasser Arafat. We did it in the most national sense possible, the most national mechanism possible. It was offered to a vote in the Palestine National Council in 1988. Whereby overwhelming support for recognizing the state of Israel came from, and for a state of Palestine on the remaining part of Palestine, which is 22% the West Bank and Gaza. The missing part of recognition was never from Palestinians, my friend. The missing part of the recognition was always from Israel. For all these years, Israel has never, ever recognized us as a state. And that perhaps was the mistake of the Oslo peace process. The biggest mistake is that we fully recognized Israel as a state on the 1967 borders, and in exchange of that, Israel sent us a letter saying that we recognize the PLO as a representative of the Palestinian people. In hindsight, my friend, I would have rejected that offer. In hindsight, we should not have accepted that recognition. In hindsight, we should have started from an equal, reciprocal point of view. In hindsight, that would have given, should Israel have recognized the Palestinian state in 1993, I tell you, we would have peace by now. That's number one. And number two, this argument about the Jewish state is just beginning in Israel. And I read from time to time the very healthy discussion in Israel. We leave that to the Israelis to decide. And believe you me, when Benjamin Netanyahu imposed this idea on the table, it is not for a genuine purpose. It is primarily to distract us from the real issues. Israel as a state, a sovereign state, can define itself and can go to the UN and define itself. This is none of our business whatsoever. But to put the stick in the wheel is meant by somebody like Netanyahu, who does not want to see the wheel going in the direction of the two-state solution, who want young, genuine, passionate people like you here to think that actually the real obstacle to peace is us, the Palestinians, not the very far right-wing government he managed to put together, not that 6 of the current cabinet are actually settlers that he has made alliance with. He has made his choice. Now the Israeli government has made a choice that the settler movement is the key component of this government, and therefore we will have to find all these excuses, pretext of why we are not making peace. As for the Palestinians that have been offered so much and they never accepted, yes, you're right, absolutely. We have been offered so much. But let me tell you this thing. Our decision in 1988 and then the signing of the Oslo Accords was never about the principles. When we agreed to enter in a peace process to end Israel's occupation that began in 1967, when we recognized the state of Israel on 78% of what we believe to be our own historic land of Palestine, when we did that because that was the maximum we could offer and the minimum we could accept. And we allied ourselves with international consensus and legitimacy. Taking that very painful compromise required establishing a national equilibrium for it, a national backing. When we said a state of Palestine on the West Bank and Gaza with East Jerusalem its capital, we did not mean to negotiate the principles. Never once in our peacemaking process, never once we signed any deal with Israel that does not clearly state the principles. Here are the principles in Oslo, that our agreement is to implement the principle of ending Israel's occupation, establishing a state on the 1967 borders, keeping all final status issues to the 5-year interim period. So all the preceding peace processes, including the roadmap, have listed the principles. Not once we, the Palestinians, were about the principles. We engaged in a peace process after another to find ways comfortable to two parties to implement these principles, not negotiate them. Regrettably, since we started this process, Israel, on the other hand, has always thought that their starting point is what is for me is mine and what is yours is negotiable. So the starting point is that we sit now and then we need to find a compromise, not between Tel Aviv and Jericho, but a compromise between Jerusalem and Jericho. So they have to compromise on our 22%. This is unacceptable by any Palestinians. And let me tell you one thing, either you take it as it is, as a state of Palestine on the 1967 borders, or there will not be any Palestinian president who will be able to represent his people genuinely, credibly, and sign off on such an agreement. For too long, there has been too much cleverness in the part of Israel. We can snatch a bit more, and another 2% here, another 5% there. Peace is not based on this. We have managed, after 50 years of suffering, after 50 years of not even wanting to recognize the state of Israel, to accept the 22%, live with it. Let's not be like merchants wanting to increase the territory we have. And now even Netanyahu is much more straightforward, by the way. It's no longer what is mine and what is yours is negotiable. Netanyahu is bluntly saying what is mine and what is yours is also mine. And therefore, it is absolutely crucial that at this point in time, that people like you, young people who believe in peace, should abandon these ideas. Yes, Palestinians have already made that historic, painful compromise 30 years ago. That compromise should not be tampered with. If we mean peace and we want to give a different future for our children, then I think 2% of the 22% would not make such a big deal for Israel. But for us, no, I heard you. But for us, the 2% of the 22% might not make a big deal for Israel. It's just a territorial greed. But for Palestine, it means one thing, the disequilibrium of the national front. And therefore, you need to understand our side as well, that if any peace process does not bring to the very minimum the Palestinian people at large have accepted, it will be seen as not genuine. As for your question about the Holocaust, you know, the Holocaust is the most heinous crime that is recorded in recent history at the hands of the Nazis. President Abbas came out in 2014, early April 2014, with an official statement describing it as the most heinous crime in history. I remember very well, I was his strategic affairs advisor, to have gone on BBC immediately to explain why we Palestinians think that the Holocaust is the most heinous crime. Because no nation more than us understand the price of discrimination, the price of targeting particular people, particular society, like the Jews were targeted here in Europe by the Nazi regime. I understand the wounds that are still there. I lived with many Jewish friends of mine, very dear, close Jewish friends of mine. I have seen many nights on Shabbat dinners, they showed me the pictures of those who suffered the Holocaust. I knew the stories firsthand. We ache for what happened. We believe that what happened should be the lesson. Never again, and the never again has to be inclusive. It must represent all of us, including the Palestinians. And believe me, I say this from the bottom of my heart. I have seen the grandmothers of my friends. I saw how they were able to survive that heinous, murderous, industrial scale killing. I understand what it means to people, and I understand that the Holocaust happened here in Europe, and maybe there were some personalities here and there that collaborated. History is clear about this, but the people of Palestine are innocent of this. You know, my friend, and I know that the hate time of Jews in Europe was during the Islamic. That's a fact. In Andalusia. It's a fact. You know, my friend, that before this whole conflict started and the state of Israel began, Jews in Jerusalem were flourishing. I want to tell you that we, the Muslims and the Christians of Jerusalem, will be lighting the Shabbat candle of our Jewish neighbors before this whole mess started. My grandfather has raised me to look up to Jews, to eat with Jews, because Judaism and Islam are the closest religions. Never there was an issue with Judaism as a religion. Never in our history. Jews and Muslims and Christians will be classmates in the same school in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, and everywhere, in Gaza even. Never we had an issue until this whole political ideology arrived to us in the middle, in the last century. Never. You know that the keys of the holiest Christian site, that is the keys of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, are held in the hands of a Muslim family for hundreds of years, because the Christian community of Jerusalem have entrusted their Muslim brothers and sisters to take care of the church. Jerusalem has been the city of one God and has been the most inclusive, and we celebrate that. And I promise you one thing. Once Jerusalem East is the capital of the state of Palestine, not only we will recognize the diversity of Jerusalem, including the connection of Jews to Jerusalem, but we will celebrate it. We will celebrate that connection. Our problem is with exclusive claims. Our problem is with those who want Jerusalem only for themselves. That is Netanyahu. That is Bennett. And therefore, I stand before you today to tell you, rethink some of these dogmas, some of these spins, some of these stereotypes, some of these pretexts that keep coming our way all the time. I think I may have covered most of your questions, my friend. I'm sorry if I missed any.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Appreciate it.
Let's take another question. Yep.
Hi, my name is Adhere, and I was in Gaza, and I was living in the biggest refugee camp in Gaza Strip. It's Jabalia refugee camp, and I witnessed the 3 wars, and I witnessed the Intifada, and I witnessed the 10 years of a blockade. And it was my first flight here to the UK before 4 months, and I got the Oxford Brookes scholarship.
Bravo! May I applaud you? May I applaud you? So you are from Gaza?
Yeah.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
So I'm doing international human rights law, and I was just wondering about, you said about the peace talks, negotiations, and about the 2-state solutions, which I will never do believe in them after all the suffering I live. I feel like all of these things are just fake talks, never did something to our case. And I am from that generation who suffered all these miserable situations in his life, which which never any human in the world could bear. And I feel like, how can peace talks contribute to the Palestinian case? How can we have that 2-state solution? And my country are deprived of their basic rights. They are deprived electricity, water, everything. So how can we manage to live in two-state solution while there is no equal rights at all, while the apartheid wall is still built? And that's why I want to ask you, like,
So you want a one-state solution?
And ask people, like, and how can peace talks contribute to this to solve our problem?
So you want a one-state solution?
I want to ask for our right of return.
Right of return.
Yeah, not a two-state solution, neither one-state solution. Because after all these peace talks since Oslo records, what happened? Nothing. Our generation still, we don't believe that peace talks can contribute after all these things. And sorry to say that, but that's how
I could feel how genuine you are, how passionate. What's your first name? What's your first name again? Hadil.
Yes.
Hadil. That's the sound of the doves. Hadil al-Hamam. Hadil, you make me proud, really. You make us all proud. And this is exactly the essence of my talk today. You, Hadil. But the essence of my talk is that despite all this, we Palestinians will remain. We Palestinians will continue raising our children to the high standard that you are here at Oxford. And we Palestinians will nurture hope because you are the hope. So my first advice to you, my first response to you, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. We have 3 rights that are birthrights. The first right is our right of self-determination. Don't let go of that right. Do not let go of your right to self-determination. Because we are a nation. We are a nation. And we are a beautiful nation, Ya Hadil. We are a beautiful nation. We are a nation that has been, clenched to our land for millennia. You know, I had the privilege of meeting many UK officials during the Christmas time, and I was making this rather light remark that Jesus is a gift from Palestine. Remember that we come from a land that has produced almost all prophets. And we should also be proud that despite all the situation, do you know, Hadil, that we have almost 0 illiteracy rate in Palestine? It's one of the lowest illiteracy rate in the world, if not the lowest, actually. Do you know, Hadil, that we have the highest per capita PhD graduates worldwide? And I hope you're going to be one of them. So there are reasons and factors and many reasons to be in despair. There are so many things that we should really be angry about. But don't lose sight. The right of self-determination is sacred. Can anybody contest the fact that we are a nation as Palestinians? Do you remember when Muhammad Assaf was singing in that? Did you see people taking off to the streets to celebrate his beautiful voice and music, Palestinian music, in Gaza, in Jerusalem, in Ramallah, in Nazareth, in Lebanon, in the refugee camps? We are a nation and we have an identity. And that nationhood can only be materialized in the form of statehood. That's number 1. Number 2, yes, said who that self-determination, that right of self-determination contradict with the right of return? It doesn't. It doesn't. You must have your state, and you could have your state based on international consensus, but you also have the right to return to your home and the right to be compensated. And there are international standards to do so. Thirdly, the third right that we must clench into is equality wherever we are. We must be treated equal. If we don't call for ending Israel's occupation and establishing our own state, compromising it is, painful it is, unfulfilled for all these years it is. You want us to call for a one state at this point in time, when Netanyahu is just waiting for that last line of defense to be removed, which is the clarity of international legality, the clarity of international law. The moment we remove that from his sight is a moment when he will go in rampage in finishing off the Israel project, the greater Israel project. You would legitimize settlements immediately if you call for that. I want you to redirect that feeling, if you can, Hadil, towards a positive energy. The problem was never in the ends, Hadil, never in the ends. The end of a two-state solution is a good end. Maybe the end of a one-state solution is a good end. But the problem has always been in the means to an end, in our ability to garner sufficient resources that will take us where we want to go. And here is the argument that I tried to make earlier, that no matter how much we as Palestinians can put up, and believe you me, we have been struggling for a long time, 100 years, an intifada after another. No matter how long we continue doing so, without an international direct intervention, this conflict will not be resolved. So my last message to you, Hadil, is that maybe this is not exactly our moment. Maybe this is not our moment. But look at the wheels of history. Only 20 years ago, you will not find mainstream Israelis who would utter the word state or Palestinians, or they would recognize the existence of a collective entity in Palestine. Things have changed, Adil. It has been painful, many setbacks, but look at the map in Palestine and see, is there any area in historic Palestine that Palestinians do not exist? I bet you will not find. We are everywhere in our homeland, everywhere. So while there is a lot of pain in Gaza, particularly in Gaza where you come from, we don't see any other alternative but to call for the end of Israel's occupation, the establishment of an independent sovereign state of Palestine, and the fulfillment of the rights of refugees to return to their homes.
Then let's take one final question, and we'll come to the hand here. Yeah, around here.
Thank you for your speech. I was wondering if you see Hamas as an impediment to peace negotiations, and if you do, what Palestinian leadership can do about that? Thank you.
Well, Hamas cannot be blamed for the peace failures, because we could have made peace before this whole thing happened. And the late Yasser Arafat was the founder of the Palestinian movement and the president of the Palestinian people, and he was the one who was engaging the Israeli governments and the US. But Hamas is a domestic issue, and it should be left and kept as a Palestinian domestic issue. It does pose a problem, and the problem is on the Palestinian national politics. It does pose an issue on the renewal of the democratic process. It does pose an issue on our national agenda, because we can't proceed. I can't stand here before you and argue for international order if Hamas does not adhere to international order and international legitimacy and international law. So that's exactly why we have been trying our best to make sure that should Hamas join the PLO, should Hamas become part of the Palestinian national decision-making process, it must also be part of the national red lines and the national policy that we have all collectively reached. This has proven to be a difficult process, very difficult, I must say. And it took much longer than one expects. And Hamas, by taking Gaza hostage for the last 12 years, has played directly in the hands of those very few but powerful in Israel, including Sharon, who left Gaza for that purpose, to actually pave the way for the division. It's a very narrow interest now in Israel to keep this situation. You know, if you read yesterday in the news, Israel is allowing Qatar to bring cash into Gaza to Hamas directly, because there are some in the Israeli government who think they benefit the most from this division between Palestinians, and they want to feed the status quo. Whenever they feel the status quo of division is deprived oxygen, which is money, they allow money to pour in. I think this is a very ill-conceived policy, and we must revisit it. But the onus here is not on Israel, I must say. The onus is primarily on us. Short of bringing Hamas on board on these terms, and short of convening and renewing our democratic process, we would be self-inflicting damage on ourselves, and we have been inflicting such damage for 12 years. I very much agree. And with that damage comes even great suffering by our people in Gaza because of the division. But we have no choices, my friend. We will not engage in a civil war. We will not, because the price of civil war can live with you as a nation for generations to come. We want to find an end to this drama, an end to this catastrophe via dialogue. Dialogue can be lengthy, but I assure you, there is no other destination Hamas can go to except being part of the national camp and accepting the rules of the national camp. And the rules are very clear. And I don't want to spell these rules, but the most important tenet is that we call for international law, we respect international law. This is the bottom line. You do not target civilians. You do not send indiscriminate rockets. You always retain the moral high ground. You do not start a war on your own without consulting the rest of your people. And you do not conclude a peace agreement without consulting your people. Hamas needs to learn what sharing means and what being part of a national camp means. And if it takes another few years, let it be. But let's not lose sight where we want to go.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. So if you join with me in thanking Ambassador Zomlot.